On behalf of Brian and myself, I'm honored to acknowledge that we are currently recording on the traditional land of the Anishinaabe. The Anishinaabe include the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. CFS Counseling and Wellbeing and United Way Simcoe Muskoka respect Indigenous history and culture and are dedicated to moving forward in the process of reconciliation with all First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people.
Welcome to Resilience Rising, the show that shatters poverty myths, sparks optimism, and fuels innovative change through community-inspired discussions.
I'm Amanda Fellows, Community Programs Manager with CFS Counseling and Wellbeing.
And I'm Brian Shelley, the Chief Executive and Philanthropy Officer at United Way Simcoe Muskoka.
The title of today's episode is Breaking the Cycle, Addressing Gender-Based Violence and Where It Starts. In 2023, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario recognized that gender-based violence and intimate partner violence is an epidemic in Ontario that requires urgent and coordinated government action. In Ontario alone, on average, more than one woman is killed each week as a result of gender-based violence. To talk about this critical issue, we welcome our guest, Will Fuentes, the manager of PAR, or the Partner Assault Response Program at CFS Counseling and Wellbeing. Thanks for joining us today, Will.
Thanks for having me.
So Will, to start, could you briefly explain what the PAR program is and how long you've been involved in it?
The PAR program is a government finance program that deals with offenders who have been charged with domestic violence. I've been doing this work with the PAR program for about, give or take, about 20 years since the PAR program came into inception.
So, I mean, we work together at CFS. I'm always curious, or maybe I've never asked you before, like, why do you like doing this work?
Yes, you have asked me that before. I like what I do, but I believe in what I do. I believe that men like myself and like any other man should be having conversations on this intimate issue of domestic violence. And I want to be where this is happening, meaning I want to be with offenders discussing the whys and how we can potentially prevent further issues of domestic violence.
So I guess to that end, can you explain how the PAR program approaches the issue of gender-based violence, particularly focusing on its root causes during boyhood and adolescence?
Right. So the PAR program, again, is implemented and was created by the Ministry of Attorney General some 20 plus years ago through their mandate. They want us through the PAR program to educate men on issues of domestic violence as well as what can prevent domestic violence from happening. We don't deal with young offenders. We only deal with adults. Anybody who is 18 years and older, we will, if they have been charged with an offense of domestic violence, they will be mandated to come to our program.
So I guess to rephrase the question, how does childhood trauma or trauma or experiences that men may experience in youth or in boyhood, how does that impact or does that impact and lead to violence as grown men?
Right. I mean, the role that men play, not just in society but in family, is crucial for younger minds as they are growing up. It's crucial for them because while they are young, as you can appreciate, they start understanding the world outside them through their parents or whoever that parental figure is. If the people who's supposed to be the parental guidance are not giving them the proper understanding of, just to put it, to jump right in, just to be in relationships and how to be in a relationship in a healthy and wholesome way, most likely they are going to learn patterns that are not healthy for themselves.
What I found really interesting about, and I've learned a lot from Will around intimate partner violence and men in that dynamic, but and I don't have a hard stat on this, but what I found really interesting, participating in it and listening to you is that one, many offenders have a childhood history of trauma, right? So whether that's sexual abuse or physical abuse or emotional abuse, whatever that looks like. And the PAR program really, I think its intention, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Will, is to attempt to break the cycle of abuse. So what you're talking about, if you can teach men different skills on how to raise up boys, their children in a different way than they were raised, it helps to, or it aims to challenge or change that cycle of abuse. Like, is that, like, am I right in saying that?
Yes, you are. So basically what you are pointing at is this intergenerational issues that all of a sudden in a group of men you are dealing with, because the issue of domestic violence for us is a cyclical issue.
Right.
And the way I see it, the way I explain it to men is like if a cycle, a toxic cycle was not stopped in a boy's life, eventually they grow up to be adults and having their own relationships. And if the only thing or mostly what they have learned is from that parental figure, the man, there are very high chances that they are going to replicate what this man at home was doing
Right.
as a parental figure. And again, if this now a young adult being in a relationship, nobody's talking to him about breaking some of the toxic cycles that he has learned, he will start procreating children, and therefore the cycle replicates.
But you know what you know, right? You see what
Exactly, exactly. I mean, it is unfortunate, and I might as well say it. It is unfortunate that for some time now, for several years, we have been, we meaning the program has been cut. It used to be 17 weeks that we used to run the program for. Now it's 12 weeks, 3 months, 2 hours. That's a drop in the bucket.
Of trying to unlearn something that someone has seen for all through childhood.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but we do what we can, correct with what we have been given, so you can appreciate, for example, we run groups of 15, 17 men to a group for 2 hours. Each one of them bring their own issues to the to group. Very difficult to, I mean, we try to address some of the issues, but you know, it is a challenge to be discussing this with men, to be discussing these issues, because again, we just don't have that much time with a man when they arrive to our program.
I think I think this is an important topic because I think there's a lot of emphasis across the social service sector, but also, cross-sectorally on women experiencing intimate partner violence, which I think it should be. We're going to have a guest on from the Collingwood Women's Shelter on another episode, so I'm not minimizing that, but I do think we don't talk enough about some of those root causes or how we end up in these circumstances. And what I've come to learn is it's a very complex and layered issue. And so I wondered if you could also speak to, so we have these pieces around, childhood trauma and all of those family dynamics, but there's also cultural and kind of societal pieces that come into play around contributing to intimate partner violence or gender-based violence. I wonder if you could speak to those pieces.
Yes. So and again, we only repeat what we are hearing, what we are seeing. So, for example, for us, one of the biggest influences that we continue seeing is this idea that that men are to be the one in control, the one who make the decisions, and kind of women kind of follow the lead. And that creates a lot of tension in the relationship. We try to challenge men's ideas, stereotypical ideas, as to what is it like to be a man in a relationship. And again, that will take some time for us to not just to address, but to hear from the men their responses. there is a lot of values, misplaced values that men bring to the when they arrive to the program, that eventually once they start open up, they start sharing and talking about. So we try to challenge those values again, because some of those values are misplaced.
Like a basic thing around that is, like an example of that is just how men are typically brought up in terms of even just talking about their feelings or their emotions, right? Men are typically not encouraged as kids to talk about how they feel in an open and honest way, right? It's much more acceptable for men to be angry, you know, or
to quote unquote suck it up.
or to suck it up,
Yeah.
right? Or like, you know, and you hear a lot about that even still in schools. Like, you know, it's almost like so societally acceptable for two boys to hit each other in the schoolyard and work it out. Or I still hear that, you know, where when women are in a fight, they hold a grudge for 16 years. And when men are in a fight, they just punch each other and move on. It's like, it becomes this very like, it's just an acceptable way for people to behave, right? Yeah.
So here's where you know, when they come to our program, just to tailgate from what Amanda is saying, you know, most men, and I'm not saying every man, but most men, is very difficult or challenging for us to start talking about just personal or intimate feelings about what is happening to us or what's happening to our relationship. To talk about, to be open and to be talking about feelings is somewhat threatening, because for most men it will make them feel vulnerable. And feeling vulnerable is something that we are not used to. You know, feeling vulnerable is more for women, if you will. And again, when they come to our program, we talk about those stereotypes, you know, that we have learned. And just because we are feeling, by the way, vulnerable, it doesn't mean that we are going to change who you are. Absolutely not. There is a lot of value when a man can express vulnerable feelings on whatever they are experiencing.
Mm-hmm. How crucial is early intervention in preventing gender-based violence?
It is huge. It is very important that, you know, when somebody for the first time has been charged with domestic violence, it is so crucial for courts to be sending that individual, man or woman. Incidentally, we on the issue of domestic violence, we also have female offenders, just to let you know. It is very crucial for us or to have and deal with people who are first-time offenders, because we hope to early on in this kind of legal situation, in criminal situation that they have engaged in, to start challenging somebody like that, so that the potential for the sooner the intervention, the sooner then the expectation is, and the hope is, that this individual will not be repeating post-program his behaviors and offenses.
I guess if we go back to one of your first answers, it's if we know that we understand that this is learned behavior, and it's been learned behavior over years and decades, the earlier that we can start unlearning that behavior, obviously the better the success rate is.
Yes, 100%. And again, you know, I go back to, it is unfortunate that we are only now dealing with, when we have clients, we only have them for 3 months. By the time a client has become a little bit more used to the way sessions are run, around expectations, by that time they are probably on their 8th, 9th session, you know, then there's only 3 more sessions to go. And then we have to say goodbye to them. You know, I wish we had more time with them as we used to, so to create and solidify a lot of our tenets to them. You know, there are a lot of principles that are not magical. It's simply just on the principle of treating others with respect. You know, many of us were not taught how to treat others with respect. We assume that that's just to happen. Well, respect is a value that needs to be cultivated. If they were to stay with us longer, we can continue having longer conversations around those wholesome values.
So it's not lost on me that dropping from 17 weeks of programming to 12 weeks is significant.
It is.
Has the quote-unquote success rate deteriorated or declined? I mean, a success rate, I don't know how you measure success rate.
Right.
But do you see, have you seen yeah.
Unfortunately, we have repeat customer, if I can put it gently.
And this is a business where you don't want to repeat customers.
Right. No, this is a business where you don't really want them to come back. And no, I wish it was different, but it's not. We have people who, because they continue reoffending, committing offenses that fall under domestic violence offenses, they are referred back to us. I mean, there has been a few times when I have had a father and a son, not necessarily in the same room, but in the same program. How tragic.
And that all goes back to that same cyclical piece.
Right. So I don't have the stats in terms of the success rate, but I can tell you this, that I have seen men sort of, when their light bulbs goes on and you just see this genuineness about not just that they have done something wrong, but now there is hope in them.
There's an opportunity to do something right.
There is an opportunity for them to make it better, differently. They know what they have done is not right, but now there is hope in them, because now they have the skills, now they have the information, now they have, they are giving themselves a chance, to do it differently and better. I have seen that, and that is part of the reason I continue doing this.
Yeah. Have you ever had clients come back to you, years later or whenever, because you've been in this a long time. We talk about success stories. That's hopeful to me, listening to you just say what you did. But there's always clients who stand out or stories that stand out specifically. Have you had that?
Not often, but I can tell you this. On a couple of occasions, I love coffee, so I go to my preferred coffee shop, and there has been a couple of occasions when I've been sitting there and somebody calls my name, and I look up, and it's one of my ex-clients, just saying hi and just briefly telling me that they are doing well. And that to me is so satisfying, because that to me speaks about safety for this individual. And hopefully,
and the hope of their partner and their children, and maybe their children. Yeah.
Can I just tell you, because this is important for me to tell you, the PAR program has been in existence for about 22 years. The PAR program as we know it. Prior to that, there were men's group running, and they were probably sharing the same topics, but it wasn't called the PAR program. The PAR program sadly came into being about give or take 22 years ago, because of women dying in intimate relationships. Here in Simcoe County, there was, and I was just looking at some of my information that I keep in my files. Here there was somebody. Her name was Arlene May. She was murdered by her ex-intimate partner. After that, after her death, there was an inquest done by then the government. Nothing happened out of that inquest. There were some recommendations, nothing happened. 2 years later, Gillian Hadley in 2002 was killed in an intimate relationship. She was killed by her ex-partner. There was another inquest done. There were some recommendations given, and 2 years later, that's when part of the recommendations, 2 years later, because of those two deaths, more or less the PAR program came into existence. This is very tragic.
Yeah, yeah.
No, what I'm about to tell you. 2015. In 2015, there were 3 women murdered in the county of Renfrew by the same men. There are recommendations in place. I'm wondering, how much truly and I'm not making the government responsible. The issue of domestic violence should be a personal issue, should be your responsibility and my responsibility to stop it. It will be nice if the government supports that, but the issue of domestic violence will continue happening so long as, in my opinion anyway, so long as we believe that that some assumptions about being a man in relationships is not challenged. These 3 women were killed in an intimate relationship. They didn't know each other. And earlier you were mentioning that in 2023, or one of you was mentioning that here in Ontario, domestic violence was named an epidemic, and it has been named. But I also want to tell you that a lot of municipalities in Ontario are yet to officially support that idea that domestic violence is an epidemic.
That's so interesting. Why do you think that is? Like, what's the hesitation to really lean into that, to recognize it for what it is, and to address it, or to to actually put into action those recommendations?
Yeah, one of my personal beliefs is that because it's so intimate, domestic violence is so intimate, people are hesitant to step into somebody's privacy, correct? That's what happened when domestic violence happened. It touches at the very core of that individual, of that family unit. And maybe there is some hesitation, from some municipalities.
I'm sure it's that, and I'm sure it's also, we still live in a patriarchy, right? We do still live in a patriarchy where there is, at certain levels, a distaste for vilifying males for the sake of being males, right? And a misunderstanding of the impact of that.
Yeah.
Right.
We see that, we've seen that certainly in Ontario with calls to action for the provincial government to enact legislation to hold municipally elected officials to a higher standard if they are to behave in abhorrent behavior, right? And there's pushback to that, right?
That's true.
So
That's fair.
Again, don't get me wrong. I truly believe that if you and I were to understand that it is a choice to be violent, then can you imagine if a lot of men start acting and thinking and acting in such a way that to tell themselves, I need to stop the violence I'm using. And violence, by the way, is not just physical.
right.
It is physical,
Yeah.
it is included, but violence has so many layers, correct? We can be violent without ever touching somebody. We can be violent by staring down at somebody. We can be violent and controlling by making a threat, So can I just tell you or share quickly this with you, which is, why does it continue happening? And I think you were asking me that before. I also believe that domestic violence continue happening in our society or societies because of these 4 factors. We call them in the program the 4 pillars that support domestic violence. Domestic violence continue happening because there is the idea that of hierarchy. There is somebody in control and others follow this person who is in control. There is the idea and practice of submission, that we submit to the one who is in control. And we submit to that person for various reasons. Then there is the issue of impunity. There are people in intimate relationships who commit chargeable offenses, who truly believe that they will not be caught. And when you see this kind of behaviors happening from generation through generation, it is very hard to break that belief about an individual. And finally, domestic violence continue happening because we continue objectifying women.
So, given this podcast and show, we are now not just a podcast; we are a show as well. But given this program focuses on poverty, I'm wondering if, in closing, given that poverty and gender inequality are often cited as root causes of gender-based violence, how does your program address these broader societal issues while working at the individual and the community level?
So poverty is a stressor, correct?
Right.
Poverty is not the creator of domestic violence, but it definitely it creates a humongous stressor, and it creates this sense of isolation as well, correct? A sense of hopelessness. I have seen in my time of working and being involved in the issue of domestic violence, I have seen both. I have seen people who come from the poorest of the poorest, and I have seen men who come from very heavy pockets, economically speaking, both of them having committed a domestic offense. I have seen on both of them, when they do want to change, a tremendous desire for getting rid of, and not knowing how, but getting rid of these practices that they had been practicing for many years. For me, the issue of domestic violence, it affects all kinds of pockets, people who are in poverty, and definitely, is something that is tragic when it happens, but it also happens to people who have high economic status.
Thanks for that, Will. I think one last piece to mention too. I think you do a great job. I've had the privilege of seeing you at work. In a group. It's a hard job to do, a really hard job, and I really appreciate how much of yourself you give to those groups and how committed you are to all of the men in that space, and how hopeful you are that each of them has the same opportunity to do something different and make a change in an otherwise situation that you could go into with lots of judgment, right? And you don't do that, and so I have a lot of respect for you in that aspect. And I just wanted to highlight too, the PAR program, it works a lot with men, but on the flip side, it also is connected to all of the women who are attached to all of those offenders. Correct. And it does do a really good job on supporting partners and victims of domestic violence, and ensuring that level of safety for all of those people too. I think that's an important thing to know, that the PAR program is twofold. It supports men in terms of hoping to break the cycle of domestic violence, but it's also supporting women and trying to create more safety.
Thank you, and thank you so much for mentioning that. We are in the month of domestic violence awareness, and that's so important. Thank you, Amanda, for mentioning that.
Yeah, thanks, Will.
Will, thank you.
Thank you.
We thank today's guest, Will Fuentes, PAR Program Manager at CFS Counseling Wellbeing, for joining us today. Thanks also to our studio partners at Rogers TV Barrie, and of course to you at home, our viewers and or our listeners, if you're listening on a podcast. Thank you for joining us. In addition to being available on Rogers TV, the video version of Resilience Rising is also available on our YouTube channels, and in an audio format, it is accessible wherever you access your favorite podcasts.
We'll see you next time on episode 3 of season 2, when we discuss safety and empowerment supporting survivors of domestic abuse. I'm Amanda Fellows of CFS Counseling and Wellbeing. with my co-host Brian Shelley of United Way Simcoe Muskoka, and we're asking you to embrace innovative change to ensure our communities are great places to live for everyone. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
We can just have a conversation for a second.